Hello to all book lovers. Welcome to Literary Journeys with River. In today's video, we'll explore the exciting beginning of the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series with The Lightning Thief. This is an illustrated summary of the first book, where we'll join Percy on his dangerous mission to recover Zeus' stolen lightning bolt. Remember, this is just a summary and doesn't replace the full experience of reading the book. Let's dive into this mythological world full of adventures. Chapter 1. Percy Jackson, a 12-year-old boy with a life that could be described as complicated, narrates how everything started to get even stranger last May. A student at Yancey Academy, a school for troubled kids in New York, Percy already had a history of incidents during school trips. However, the visit to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan would be remembered as the most chaotic of all. Percy tells us that the trip was led by Mr. Brunner, a Latin teacher who, though not remarkable at first, was one of the few teachers who really managed to capture his interest. Brunner, who used a motorized wheelchair, had a passion for stories and ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, making him a peculiar but admired teacher in Percy's eyes. Despite his efforts to stay out of trouble, Percy couldn't avoid getting into it. Nancy Bobofit, an annoying red-haired girl, kept throwing pieces of her sandwich at Grover, Percy's best friend. Grover was a frail and nervous boy, making him an easy target for Nancy's bullying. Percy, already on probation at school, struggled to contain his anger, but fate had other plans for him. During the guided tour of the museum, Percy was forced to participate in Mr. Brunner's explanation of Greek mythology, managing a somewhat correct answer about Kronos and the Olympian gods. However, Nancy Bobofit's taunts and the constant disdain from Mrs. Dodds, a math teacher who seemed to hate Percy from the moment he arrived at Yancey, began to wear on his patience. The climax came when Nancy accused Percy of pushing her into a fountain at the museum, something he didn't remember doing. Mrs. Dodds separated him from the group, taking him to an empty gallery inside the museum. What happened next was beyond what Percy could have imagined. Mrs. Dodds, who had seemed like just a strict and unpleasant teacher, transformed into a terrifying creature with bat wings and claws. At the last moment, Mr. Brunner unexpectedly appeared and tossed a pen to Percy, which transformed into a bronze sword when he caught it. In an instinctive act, Percy used the sword to defend himself against the creature, and in an instant, Mrs. Dodds exploded into dust, leaving Percy alone and confused. When he returned to his classmates, he discovered that no one else seemed to remember Mrs. Dodds, as if she had never existed. Percy was perplexed and began to question his sanity as the approaching storm reflected the storm of doubts now forming in his mind. Chapter 2. Percy Jackson was used to his life taking strange turns now and then, but the bizarre hallucination he experienced at the museum didn't fade away. From that moment on, everyone at Yancey Academy acted as if Mrs. Dodds had never existed, replacing her in their memories with a cheerful and unfamiliar teacher named Mrs. Kerr. Percy tried to confirm the reality of what he had seen, but every time he mentioned Mrs. Dodds, others looked at him as if he were crazy, including his friend Grover, who, although trying to deny Mrs. Dodds' existence, showed hesitation that revealed something was not right. The atmosphere at the academy grew increasingly strange, and the weather also behaved unusually, with storms and tornadoes hitting the region. Meanwhile, Percy became more and more irritable, his grades plummeted, and his conflicts with other students, like Nancy Bobofit, intensified. The situation reached a breaking point when Percy insulted his English teacher and soon after received an official notice that he wouldn't be invited back to the academy the next year. However, there was something about Mr. Brunner's Latin class that continued to captivate Percy. He remembered how the teacher had told him that learning the subject was a matter of life and death, which began to take on an unsettling relevance in Percy's mind. Determined to clear up his doubts and get some help, Percy headed to the teacher's office, but what he overheard left him perplexed. Percy heard a conversation between Mr. Brunner and Grover, discussing his well-being. They mentioned something about a benevolent one at the school, the deadline of the summer solstice, and the need to keep Percy safe. They also referred to a mist that could alter the student's perception, something Percy didn't understand but that clearly involved him in a danger he wasn't aware of. Disconcerted and scared by what he had overheard, Percy returned to his dormitory without confronting Grover, though his suspicions grew. On the last day at the academy, Percy finished his exams with a mix of relief and sadness, knowing he wouldn't see his classmates and teachers again. As he left Latin class, Mr. Brunner tried to encourage him, but his words only left Percy more confused and hurt, suggesting that Yancey was never the right place for him. On the bus ride back to New York City, Percy noticed Grover's increasingly nervous behavior. Finally, Percy confronted him about what he had overheard the previous night, but Grover dodged the conversation until an incident on the road forced them to stop. The bus broke down in the middle of nowhere, right in front of an old fruit stand run by 3 old women knitting giant electric blue socks. The most disturbing thing was that the old women seemed to be staring directly at Percy. Grover, seeing them, turned pale with terror and urged Percy to get back on the bus. However, Percy watched as one of the old women pulled out a huge pair of scissors and cut a thread, which caused an even more terrifying reaction in Grover. Percy, intrigued and frightened, tried to get answers, but all he managed to confirm was that something sinister was happening. Grover, visibly shaken, insisted on accompanying Percy home, warning him to be prepared for the worst. Percy then realized that cutting that thread meant more than just a simple gesture. It was an omen of death, one that might be directed at him. Chapter 3. Nervous after the recent events, Percy Jackson made an impulsive decision upon arriving at the bus terminal. He left Grover behind. His friend's unsettling behavior, which seemed to anticipate something terrible, was overwhelming. Instead of waiting for Grover, Percy slipped away and took a taxi to his home on the Upper East Side. When he arrived at the small apartment he shared with his mother, Percy was met by Gabe Ugliano, his unpleasant stepfather, who was playing poker with his friends. Gabe, whom Percy had nicknamed Smelly Gabe because of his stench of stale garlic pizza and beer, showed no interest in Percy's return. All he cared about was getting the money Percy had with him. Gabe represented everything Percy detested: lazy, selfish, and always making his mother's life harder. The only bright spot in Percy's life was his mother, Sally Jackson. Sally was a sweet and kind-hearted woman, always dedicated to her son despite the difficulties. She had led a hard life. She lost her parents in a plane crash when she was a child, and after caring for a sick uncle, she found herself without the resources to pursue her dreams of becoming a writer. However, she met Percy's father, a man she remembered fondly, although he disappeared before Percy was born. Percy's return home brightened when Sally surprised him with news of a trip to Montauk, a special place for both of them. There, in the seaside cabin where Sally had spent time with Percy's father, she hoped they could enjoy some time together away from daily tensions. Upon arriving at Montauk, Percy noticed how his mother seemed to rejuvenate. They spent the afternoon as they always did, walking on the beach, eating blue treats, a tradition Sally kept as a small act of rebellion against Gabe, and talking around a bonfire. During a conversation, Percy couldn't help but ask about his father. Sally, though pained by the memory, spoke fondly of the man, describing his kindness and strength. Despite the tranquil setting, Percy couldn't shake off the strange recent events from his mind. That night, he had a disturbing dream in which a horse and an eagle fought violently on a beach while a dark voice laughed in the distance. The dream turned into a real storm that lashed the cabin, and Percy was awakened by banging on the door. Grover appeared on the doorstep, soaked and agitated, but the most surprising thing was that Grover wasn't wearing pants, and instead of human legs, Percy saw he had hooves. The revelation left Percy paralyzed, while Grover urgently tried to warn them that something was chasing them. Sally, with an expression of fear Percy had never seen before, reacted quickly. She grabbed their things and ordered Percy and Grover to get in the car immediately. With no time to process what was happening, Percy began to understand that his life was about to change drastically and that the secrets his mother had tried to protect him from for so many years could no longer be kept hidden. Chapter 4. As we sped through the night, storms roared around us, and the rain battered the Camaro's windshield mercilessly. Percy, sitting in the back seat next to an injured and semi-conscious Grover, tried to make sense of what was happening. The revelation that his best friend was a satyr, half human and half goat, had added a new level of confusion to his already tumultuous life. Despite his condition, Grover tried to explain to Percy that he had been watching over him for a long time, though he had never stopped being his friend. Percy couldn't process everything that was happening. His mother, Sally Jackson, seemed desperate to get him to a safe place, a camp Percy barely knew anything about, but which his father wanted him to reach. As Sally drove at high speed through narrow, dark roads, Percy noticed that something else was following them, something dangerous that was getting closer with every passing second. Finally, the danger revealed itself when a flash of lightning illuminated the gigantic figure of a creature approaching them on the road. Sally, her face pale, urged Percy to run toward a large tree on a nearby hill, assuring him that it marked the boundary of the camp, where he would be safe. Percy, however, refused to leave her alone, and together they began dragging Grover toward the tree as the creature, a minotaur, inexorably closed in. The minotaur was enormous, with a muscular body covered in coarse hair and a monstrous head with sharp horns. Although Percy recognized it from the stories Mr. Brunner had told them, he couldn't believe he was seeing that mythical creature in real life. With growing terror, Percy and his mother tried to reach the tree, but the minotaur caught up with them. In a desperate attempt to protect Percy, Sally tried to distract the beast but was captured and, before Percy's horrified eyes, dissolved in a flash of golden light. Pain and anger flooded Percy as he watched his mother disappear. Determined to avenge her, he faced the minotaur with unexpected bravery. Using his wits, Percy lured it toward the tree, and in a moment of sheer desperation, managed to tear off one of its horns and use it as an improvised weapon. With a precise attack, Percy stabbed the minotaur in its side, causing the creature to disintegrate into dust, carried away by the wind as had happened with Mrs. Dodds. Though the storm was receding, Percy was devastated. Despite his victory, he had just lost his mother, and his world was plunged into chaos. With what little strength he had left, he dragged Grover down the hill toward the farmhouse his mother had mentioned, which lay beyond the solitary pine tree. There, as they reached the porch of a large house, Percy collapsed. In the midst of his despair, he glimpsed a bearded man and a blonde girl watching him with concern. Before losing consciousness, he heard the girl say that it must be him, while the man ordered that he be taken inside to receive help. Chapter 5. Percy was immersed in strange dreams, where animals seemed to want to attack him as much as seek food. Although he woke briefly several times, everything around him was so confusing that he soon drifted back into unconsciousness. In those moments of semi-wakefulness, Percy vaguely sensed a friendly presence. A blonde, curly-haired girl who fed him some kind of pudding. This girl, on one occasion, asked him urgent questions about something related to the summer solstice, but Percy, unable to understand what was happening, couldn't give her any answers. When he finally regained full consciousness, Percy found himself in a very different place. He was lying on a deck chair on a porch, wrapped in a blanket, gazing out at an idyllic landscape of green hills and a strawberry field stretching under a clear sky. Beside him, on a table, was a refreshing drink, which he sipped with difficulty due to the weakness in his hands. To his surprise, the taste wasn't what he expected, but something that reminded him of the chocolate chip cookies his mother used to make, providing a comforting sense of warmth and energy. Grover, his satyr friend, was with him on the porch, looking tired but relieved to see him awake. Grover carried a shoebox containing a broken horn, which Percy immediately recognized as the Minotaur's horn. As he recalled the battle and what had happened, Percy asked about his mother, but Grover's sad expression confirmed the worst. His mother had disappeared, probably forever. Despite the guilt and sadness he felt, Grover tried to console Percy, explaining that his mission was to protect him, though he believed he had failed. Percy, trying to stay strong, drank the contents of the glass Grover had given him and felt the pain ease a little. Though the grief over losing his mother was still present, the drink gave him a new energy that helped him stay on his feet. With Grover's help, Percy walked across the porch and reached a place known as the Big House. There, he encountered two men playing cards. One was small, chubby, and slovenly in appearance, reminding him of an aged cherub and whom he would soon discover was named Mr. D. The other man, to his surprise, turned out to be Mr. Brunner, his former Latin teacher, though he now went by the name Chiron. Chiron and Mr. D began to talk to Percy about his situation and the place he was in, Camp Half-Blood. Chiron revealed that the Greek gods, far from being mere myths, were real and still alive, influencing the modern world from their new home, which moved with the power of the West, currently in the United States. Mr. D, who turned out to be Dionysus, the god of wine, wasn't particularly interested in Percy or his questions, but Chiron patiently explained the importance of the camp and the fact that Percy had passed the first test by arriving there alive. Percy began to understand that there was something more to him, something related to the gods, though he couldn't yet fully grasp what it meant. Finally, when Percy asked who Chiron really was, the teacher revealed his true identity: a centaur, half man, half horse. Chiron's transformation astonished Percy, who, despite all the revelations, was far from fully understanding the new world he had entered. With his transformation complete, Chiron, now in his centaur form, guided Percy to meet the other campers, preparing him for the beginning of a new and extraordinary life at Camp Half-Blood. Chapter 6. After coming to terms with the fact that his Latin teacher was a centaur, Percy took a walk with Chiron around the camp. Though he enjoyed the tour, he decided to keep a safe distance from the centaur's rear, recalling previous experiences in parades and wanting to avoid any unpleasant surprises. During the walk, Percy noticed that the campers, most of whom were older than him, watched him with curiosity and whispered about his feat with the Minotaur. While admiring the big house, Percy saw a shadow in the attic window and felt that someone was watching him. When he asked Chiron, he quickly changed the subject, insisting that the attic was empty. However, Percy wasn't convinced. Chiron showed him the different areas of the camp, explaining that the strawberry fields funded the camp's operations and that Dionysus' power, though more effective in vineyards, helped the strawberries grow abundantly. During the tour, Percy expressed concern about Grover, who was being judged by the Council of Cloven Elders. Chiron explained that, although Grover had failed in some areas, he still had a chance, though there wasn't much hope due to an incident that had occurred 5 years earlier, which Chiron avoided detailing. Percy tried to change the subject to a thought that had been troubling him. If the gods existed, did the underworld as well? Chiron confirmed with regret that it did, and advised Percy not to dwell too much on it until he had more information. However, Percy couldn't stop wondering what that meant for his mother, who had vanished in a flash of golden light. During the tour of the cabins, Percy observed the different structures, each representing an Olympian god. Some cabins were empty, and others, like those of Zeus and Hera, were only used on special occasions. Cabin 3, made of sea stone, particularly caught Percy's attention with its solitary and melancholic air. When they reached cabin 11, Percy met Luke, a veteran camper with a large scar on his face, who explained that all newcomers stayed in that cabin until they were claimed. This meant that Percy had not yet been claimed by his divine father. Though Luke was friendly, Percy couldn't help but feel the tension among the campers, who watched him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Annabeth, the girl who had cared for him while he was unconscious, took him outside the cabin to show him more of the camp. As they talked, Percy realized that Annabeth had high expectations of him and was frustrated by his lack of knowledge about his own nature. Annabeth tried to explain that Percy's problems with dyslexia and ADHD were signs that he was a demigod, a half-blood, and that his mind was wired to read ancient Greek and face dangers that mortals couldn't see. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Clarice, a burly and ill-tempered camper, daughter of Ares. Clarice, along with her friends, tried to intimidate Percy by dragging him to the bathroom for an initiation ceremony. However, something strange happened. Just as Clarice was about to dunk Percy's head in a toilet, the water came to life. Jets of water began shooting out of the toilets and showers, throwing Clarice and her friends out of the bathroom, while Percy remained miraculously dry in the midst of the chaos. Annabeth, surprised by what had happened, looked at Percy with newfound curiosity. Despite Clarice's threat of revenge, Annabeth could only say one thing. She wanted Percy on her team for the next game of Capture the Flag. Percy, though baffled by his own abilities, began to understand that there was much more to his nature than he had imagined. Chapter 7. The news of the bathroom incident spread like wildfire among the campers. Everywhere Percy went, he was met with curious glances and whispers. Even when Annabeth accompanied him on a tour of the camp, it was clear that everyone was aware of what had happened. During the walk, Annabeth showed him different places, like the forge, where campers made their own swords, and the climbing wall, which wasn't an ordinary climbing wall but a pair of walls that moved through rocks and spewed lava, making climbing it a real challenge. Finally, Annabeth said goodbye to go train, leaving Percy with instructions on how to get to the dining hall for dinner. Percy tried to apologize for the bathroom incident, but Annabeth took it coolly, though she also acknowledged that somehow, Percy had the power to control water. Before leaving, Annabeth mentioned the need for Percy to speak with the oracle, leaving Percy even more confused. While alone, Percy observed something unusual in the lake: two girls underwater who seemed like ordinary teenagers but were actually naiads, water spirits. Annabeth warned him about them, saying they didn't make good girlfriends. The conversation that followed was revealing for Percy. Annabeth explained that the campers were demigods, the offspring of gods and humans. Percy began to accept the idea that his father might be one of the Olympian gods. Percy learned that his situation was uncertain until his father claimed him as his son. This recognition process didn't always happen, leaving many campers in a sort of limbo, waiting for a sign that might never come. Some campers, like Annabeth, stayed at camp year-round, as it was too dangerous for them to live in the outside world, where monsters hunted them. Others, more fortunate, could return to their families during the school year. Later, Percy returned to cabin 11, where Luke, the counselor, provided him with a sleeping bag and some towels. Luke, though friendly, also showed a dark and bitter side, especially when Percy asked about prophecies and the importance some campers, like Annabeth, placed on certain events and their destiny. Dinner at Camp Half-Blood was a new experience for Percy. All the campers gathered in the dining pavilion, where each cabin had its own table. Since Percy was still undetermined, he sat with Hermes' cabin. He discovered that part of the food was offered as a sacrifice to the gods by burning it in a central fire. Though skeptical, Percy followed the tradition, silently wishing that whoever his father was would reveal himself soon. During dinner, Mr. D, with his usual disdain, announced Percy's arrival at the camp. Then, everyone headed to the amphitheater for the nightly campfire, where they sang songs and enjoyed snacks. For the first time, Percy felt a slight sense of belonging in this strange new world. That night, exhausted by all the revelations and emotions of the day, Percy quickly fell asleep in his sleeping bag, clutching the Minotaur's horn as a reminder of his journey to that point. Although he felt momentarily at peace, he wished he had known how brief those moments of tranquility at Camp Half-Blood would be. Chapter 8. In the following days, Percy began to settle into a new routine at Camp Half-Blood. Although it seemed almost normal, he couldn't ignore that his instructors were satyrs, nymphs, and a centaur. Every morning, Annabeth taught him ancient Greek, and surprisingly, Percy found that he could read it more easily than English, confirming Annabeth's theory about his dyslexia. For the rest of the day, Percy tried various outdoor activities, looking for one in which he excelled. However, neither archery nor running was his thing. The forest nymphs, who were his instructors in the races, easily left him behind, and Clarice, daughter of Ares, defeated him in wrestling. The only activity in which Percy seemed to have some talent was canoeing, but it wasn't exactly the heroic skill expected of the boy who had defeated the Minotaur. The older campers observed Percy with curiosity, trying to discern who his divine father might be, but none could identify him with certainty. Despite everything, Percy began to enjoy the camp. He grew accustomed to the morning mist over the beach, the scent of strawberries in the air, and the strange sounds of monsters in the forest at night. However, he still thought about his mother and the possibility of saving her now that he knew the gods and myths were real. Percy increasingly understood Luke's bitterness toward his father, Hermes, and wondered why his own father, whoever he was, hadn't given him any sign. On Tuesday, Percy had his first sword fighting lesson under the direction of Luke, the best swordsman in the camp. Although Percy showed good reflexes, no sword seemed to suit him. However, when it came time to duel with Luke, Percy surprised everyone, including Luke, by momentarily disarming him. The feat piqued Luke's interest, and he decided to continue training Percy to see what he was capable of with a proper sword. On Friday afternoon, after an exhausting session at the climbing wall, Percy met with Grover by the lake. During the conversation, Grover confessed his concern about his future as a satyr and the possibility of getting his searcher's license. Percy tried to cheer him up, but the talk drifted into darker topics, such as the camp's empty cabins and the story of Talia, Zeus' daughter, who sacrificed herself to save her friends, turning into the pine tree that protected the camp's borders. The story left Percy filled with doubts and feelings of guilt, especially about whether he could have done more to save his mother. That night, the entire camp prepared for the much-anticipated game of Capture the Flag. Percy was assigned to the border patrol, a task he found boring until he was attacked by Clarice and several of her brothers from Ares' cabin. Though Percy was initially overwhelmed, something changed when he fell into the stream. The water seemed to give him unexpected strength and abilities, allowing him to defeat his opponents with a skill he had never shown before. The victory went to Percy's team, and the entire camp celebrated. However, the joy was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a giant hellhound, which attacked Percy. Though Chiron managed to save him, the incident made it clear that someone had summoned the creature from the underworld, which wasn't supposed to happen. The chaos gave way to a moment of awe when a glowing symbol appeared above Percy's head, a trident, the sign that his father had claimed him. Chiron solemnly announced that Percy was the son of Poseidon, one of the big three gods. All the campers, even those from Ares' cabin, knelt before him, recognizing the significance of this event. Percy, still stunned by everything that had happened, could barely process what it meant to be the son of the god of the sea. Chapter 9. The next morning, Percy was moved to Cabin 3, Poseidon's cabin. It was the only empty cabin, and now, after being claimed as the son of the sea god, Percy had to stay there. The cabin was spacious but lonely. Being alone in the cabin wasn't what Percy wanted, especially after starting to feel like part of Cabin 11. Now, separated from the other campers, he felt isolated and depressed, as if he had been marked as someone dangerous. Although no one spoke directly about the Hellhound attack, it was clear that everyone was uneasy. The incident had shown that even the camp, which had always been considered a safe haven, wasn't immune to threats. The revelation that Percy was Poseidon's son had changed everything for him, turning him into a target and causing others to avoid him out of fear or distrust. His lessons with Luke continued, but now they were private. Luke didn't go easy on him, pushing him harder than ever, knowing that Percy needed all the training he could get for what lay ahead. Annabeth also continued teaching him Greek, but she seemed distant and worried, muttering to herself about missions and plans. Even Clarice, despite her desire for revenge over the broken spear, kept her distance, preferring to ignore him rather than confront him. One night, Percy found a newspaper on his cabin doorstep. It was an issue of the New York Daily News, containing an article about his mother's disappearance and suggesting that Percy might be involved in it. The article left him furious and sad, reminding him of the gravity of the situation he was in. That night, Percy had a nightmare in which two men, dressed in Greek robes, fought on a beach while a dark voice called to him from the depths of the earth. He woke up sweating and startled, just before dawn. Grover appeared early in the morning, worried. Mr. Dionysus wanted to see Percy. Percy prepared for the worst, convinced he was in serious trouble for being the son of one of the big three, something that was forbidden. However, instead of being punished, Dionysus, in his typical sarcastic and dismissive tone, mentioned that he was considering turning Percy into a dolphin, an option that seemed less terrible compared to what he could have done. Chiron, more serious, revealed the real reason they had called Percy. Zeus and Poseidon were in a violent dispute because Zeus's master bolt had been stolen, and Zeus suspected that Poseidon was behind the theft, using his son Percy to carry it out. Although Percy denied any involvement, he understood that the situation was extremely serious. Chiron explained that the gods couldn't cross into other gods' territories without invitation, so only a hero could retrieve the bolt. Faced with the choice of a dangerous quest or being turned into a dolphin, Percy accepted the quest. Chiron told him he had to consult the oracle to receive his prophecy. He climbed to the attic where the oracle, an ancient spirit inhabiting the mummified corpse of a woman, resided. The vision he had was disturbing. The oracle told him he would travel west, face a rebellious god, retrieve what was stolen, but be betrayed by a friend, and in the end, he wouldn't save what mattered most. These words left Percy uneasy, but he didn't reveal everything the oracle had told him to Chiron. Back at the big house, Chiron explained that Percy had to travel west to Los Angeles, where the entrance to the underworld was located. Grover, though scared, volunteered to accompany him, and Annabeth also joined the group, determined to fulfill her desire to go on a quest. Time was running out as they had only 10 days to complete the quest before the summer solstice. With a storm growing more intense over the camp, Chiron urged them to prepare quickly for the journey. Chapter 10. Percy didn't take long to pack his things for the quest. He decided to leave the Minotaur's horn in the cabin and only packed the essentials in the backpack Grover had given him. At the camp store, they lent him $100 and 20 gold drachmas, special coins that could be useful for non-mortal transactions, as Chiron explained. Additionally, Chiron gave Percy and Annabeth a canteen of nectar and a pouch of ambrosia, divine foods that should only be used in case of emergency, as while they healed half-bloods quickly, they could be lethal if consumed in excess. Annabeth brought along her magic Yankees cap, a gift from her mother Athena, along with a book on classical architecture in ancient Greek and a bronze knife hidden in her sleeve. Grover, for his part, carried his fake feet and a Rasta cap to disguise his horns, as well as a backpack full of apples and tin cans to snack on, and a reed flute that his goat father had made for him. When they said their goodbyes to the other campers and climbed Half-Blood Hill toward the pine tree that was once Talia, they found Chiron waiting for them with Argus, the camp's head of security. Argus, who had eyes all over his body, was there to drive them to the city in a van. Luke arrived just in time to say goodbye and give Percy a gift, a pair of sneakers with wings on the heels that activated with the word Maya. Although Luke told Percy he had used them on his own quest and that they would be useful, Chiron advised Percy not to use them, as floating in the air wouldn't be the wisest move for Poseidon's son. Instead, Percy decided to give them to Grover, who, although he initially struggled to control the shoes, was thrilled with the idea of flying. Before Percy left, Chiron handed him a pen that, when uncapped, transformed into a celestial bronze sword called Anaklusmos, which in Greek means riptide. This sword, a gift from his father Poseidon, was meant for Percy and was lethal to monsters and creatures of the underworld, but harmless to mortals. Moreover, the sword was enchanted to always return to Percy's pocket if he lost it. With Anaklusmos in hand, Percy finally understood the gravity of his quest. On the ride to the city, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover reflected on their situation. Annabeth revealed the rivalry between their parents, Athena and Poseidon, which explained the tension between her and Percy. As Argus drove them to the Greyhound bus station in Manhattan, Percy felt torn between his desire to save his mother from Hades and his resentment toward Poseidon, who had never been present in his life. When they arrived at the Greyhound bus station, Argus said goodbye and left them ready to board. As they waited, Percy began to feel the presence of something sinister. And he wasn't wrong. 3 elderly women boarded the bus, and to Percy's horror, he recognized one of them as Mrs. Dodds, the teacher who had tried to kill him at school. The other 2 elderly women were also Furies, monsters from the underworld sent to kill him. Percy put on Annabeth's invisibility cap to try to escape, but he couldn't leave his friends behind. When the Furies revealed their true form and began to attack, Percy made a bold decision. He took control of the bus and veered it violently, causing chaos. Finally, they managed to stop the bus in the middle of a forest in New Jersey, but the Furies didn't give up. Percy faced them with Anaklusmos and, with the help of Annabeth and Grover, managed to defeat 2 of them. However, Mrs. Dodds, the leader of the trio, was still alive and promised that Zeus would destroy them before retreating. With the bus in flames and the Furies calling for reinforcements, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover had no choice but to flee into the forest under the rain, not knowing what awaited them on their dangerous quest. Chapter 11. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover continued their march through the dark forests of New Jersey, fleeing from the Furies that had attacked their bus. The explosion and the storm that followed still echoed in their minds as they tried to get as far away as possible. Grover, clearly shaken, trembled as he recalled that they had faced all 3 kindly ones at the same time, an extremely dangerous situation. Despite everything, Annabeth kept pushing them forward, determined to put as much distance as possible between them and their attackers. Percy couldn't help but remember that, in addition to losing the bus, they had also lost all their money, clothes, and food, which didn't improve his mood. However, Annabeth made it clear that she didn't need Percy to protect her, though she appreciated his bravery in facing the Furies. For Annabeth, this quest was more than just an adventure. It was her only chance to prove her worth outside of Camp Half-Blood, something that made her feel immense pressure. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the glow of the city disappeared, and darkness enveloped them completely. However, Annabeth's determination didn't waver, while Percy tried to understand his companion better. He discovered that Annabeth hadn't left camp since she was 7 years old, something that explained her desire to prove herself in the real world, where real dangers awaited. Suddenly, in the middle of the darkness, they spotted a neon light illuminating the path. The smell of fried food made their mouths water, especially Percy's, who was desperate for a hamburger after weeks of eating healthier food at camp. As they approached, they realized it wasn't a fast food restaurant but a roadside store filled with garden statues, with a neon sign announcing Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium. Despite Grover's warnings, who was uneasy and smelled danger, Percy and Annabeth decided to approach. The store was full of life-size statues of people and animals, all with an unsettling realism. The store's owner, a mysterious woman who called herself Auntie M, kindly invited them in and offered them free food, assuring them they didn't need money. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover accepted the invitation, though Annabeth's cautious attitude didn't go unnoticed. As they ate, Auntie M told them a sad story about how she had once been a beautiful woman, but a jealous goddess had caused a terrible accident that transformed her into what she was now. Although Percy sympathized with her, Annabeth seemed increasingly uneasy, especially when the woman complimented her gray eyes and offered to take their photo for a future statue. Ignoring Annabeth and Grover's warnings, Percy agreed to Auntie M's proposal, leading them out to the statue garden. There, when the woman was about to remove the veil covering her face, Annabeth, realizing who she really was, screamed for Percy not to look at her. Auntie M was none other than Medusa, the Gorgon who had been punished by Athena, Annabeth's mother. Grover and Annabeth tried to help Percy, but he had to face Medusa alone, using a glass ball to look at her reflection and avoid being petrified. With a precise strike, Percy managed to decapitate Medusa, causing the monster to disintegrate, leaving only her head as a trophy. After the battle, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover reflected on what had happened. Annabeth explained that Medusa had been turned into a monster by Athena as punishment for meeting Poseidon in her temple. Percy, frustrated with the gods and their quest, decided to send Medusa's head to Olympus as a gift to the gods, a move Grover considered dangerous, but Percy carried out anyway. Finally, they decided they needed a new plan, aware that the journey would be even more difficult than they had imagined. Chapter 12. After their encounter with Medusa, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover were exhausted and decided to camp in a clearing in the woods near the main road. The place was littered with trash, crushed cans, and remnants of what seemed to be local teenagers' parties. Although they had taken some supplies from Auntie M's house, they didn't dare light a fire for fear of attracting more monsters. The events of the day, including facing the Furies and Medusa, had already been enough. They opted to take turns keeping watch, and Percy volunteered for the first round. Annabeth, exhausted, fell asleep as soon as she lay down under the blankets, while Grover, in his usual style, climbed onto a low branch with his flying shoes and leaned against the trunk, watching the polluted sky. Percy noticed that Grover seemed particularly down, and when he asked what was wrong, Grover pointed to the trash around them and the smog-filled sky. He explained that as a satyr, it pained him to see the damage humans had done to the planet. Then he mentioned something Percy didn't know. His true mission, beyond protecting half-bloods, was to find the god Pan, who had disappeared 2,000 years ago. Satyrs, especially those aspiring to be searchers like Grover, believed that Pan could still be found and awakened to protect nature once more. The story of Pan's disappearance and the satyr's devotion to finding him moved Percy. He learned that Grover's father had also been a searcher and, like all those before him, had disappeared without a trace. However, Grover was determined to be the first searcher to return alive, though he admitted that none had succeeded in 2,000 years. Percy, impressed by Grover's bravery, changed the subject and asked how they planned to enter the underworld to retrieve the Master Bolt. Grover confessed that neither he nor Annabeth had a concrete plan, but both felt there was something strange about the quest. The Furies, for example, had acted unusually, as if they were looking for something more than Percy. Feeling guilty, Percy confessed to Grover that his real reason for embarking on the quest wasn't the Master Bolt but rescuing his mother from Hades. Grover, with his ability to sense emotions, already knew this and suggested that part of Percy also wanted to prove his worth to his father, Poseidon, though Percy vehemently denied it. Finally, Percy, exhausted, fell asleep while Grover softly played his flute. During his sleep, Percy found himself in a dark cavern facing a bottomless abyss, surrounded by the spirits of the dead who tried to warn him of imminent danger. In the depths of the abyss, an ancient and powerful voice addressed him, suggesting that he was being used by the gods and offering him a deal. If he handed over the Master Bolt, he would get what he wanted most, his mother. Percy woke up startled at dawn, still shaken by the dream. Annabeth was preparing an improvised breakfast with the supplies they had taken from Auntie M's house. Grover, for his part, had found an unexpected friend, a pink poodle named Gladiola. The poodle had run away from a wealthy family who was offering a $200 reward for its return. Grover explained that Gladiola, who had read the reward posters, was willing to help them in exchange for being returned to his family. Percy, initially incredulous, was forced to accept the idea when Annabeth, serious, suggested they should take advantage of the opportunity. The plan was simple: return the poodle, collect the reward, and use the money to buy train tickets west. Percy, still worried about the dream and what awaited them in the underworld, agreed, though he made it clear he didn't want to travel by bus again. Annabeth, pointing to some nearby train tracks, assured him they would take the train, which was scheduled to leave at noon, according to Gladiola. Chapter 13. For 2 days, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover traveled on the Amtrak train through vast, tranquil landscapes, though the calm exterior couldn't relax Percy, who felt they were being watched and hunted. The fact that Percy was being sought by the police kept him even more on edge, especially after seeing his photo in the newspaper alongside an article accusing him of being involved in his mother's disappearance and the explosion of a bus. As the train crossed fields and rivers, Percy had unsettling visions: centaurs hunting in a field and a gigantic creature that looked like a lion, but both encounters went unnoticed by the other passengers. These episodes, along with uncomfortable nights sleeping in their seats, only heightened Percy's tension. Annabeth, for her part, was concerned about Percy's disturbing dreams, in which a malevolent voice offered him a deal to free his mother. Although Annabeth suggested that it might not be Hades, Percy was anguished by the possibility that it was, but confused by the intentions of that mysterious voice. Finally, the train arrived in St. Louis, where Annabeth, fascinated by the Gateway Arch, decided they should visit it. Although Percy wasn't comfortable with the idea, they followed her. During the visit, Percy's bad feeling intensified. As they observed the city from the top of the arch, they encountered a strange woman and her chihuahua, who soon revealed herself to be the monstrous Chimera, and the woman, Echidna, the mother of all monsters. Chimera, who transformed from a simple chihuahua into a gigantic and terrifying creature, attacked Percy. Although Percy tried to defend himself, the snake that served as Chimera's tail bit him, injecting a deadly venom. Disarmed and weakened, Percy found himself cornered. Echidna taunted him, urging him to prove his divine lineage by jumping into the Mississippi River to save himself. Percy, remembering the signs from his father Poseidon, realized he had no other choice. In a final act of faith, he decided to leap from the top of the arch, as Chimera's flames reached him and the venom coursed through his body. His fate was now in the hands of the river and the gods. Chapter 14. Percy's fall from the top of the Gateway Arch was a whirlwind of terror, with the Mississippi River rushing toward him like an inevitable sentence. However, instead of crashing into the water, Percy found himself submerged in a surreal environment where, surprisingly, he felt no pain or traces of the venom Chimera had injected into his leg. He was at the bottom of the river, surrounded by silt and trash, but the most surprising thing was that he wasn't wet, and even stranger, he could breathe underwater. Percy's disbelief turned into gratitude when a voice echoed in his mind, thanking him for being alive and urging him to keep going. The appearance of a female figure, whom he initially mistook for his mother, guided him toward a crucial mission. He had to go to the beach in Santa Monica before venturing into the underworld. The figure, ethereal and formed by the water itself, assured him that his mother's fate wasn't as grim as he thought and that his father, Poseidon, believed in him. However, The figure's cryptic warning about not trusting certain gifts left Percy with many questions and no clear answers. Spurred on by faith in his father, Percy retrieved his sword, Anaklusmos, from the muddy riverbed and swam to the surface. When he emerged next to a floating McDonald's, Percy noticed that the scene in the city was chaotic, with helicopters flying overhead and a crowd of onlookers gathered near the arch, where emergency vehicles were parked. Although a couple of reporters hinted that there were no fatalities, one of them mentioned that security cameras showed a teenager, who was clearly Percy, involved in the explosion. Fearing capture, Percy tried to blend in with the crowd, but he was recognized by a woman who had witnessed Chimera's transformation at the top of the arch. Before the situation could worsen, Grover found him and hugged him tightly, relieved to see him alive. Annabeth also joined the group, showing concern over Percy's impressive fall. After a brief discussion, Percy explained what had happened in the river, including the encounter with the mysterious water woman and her message. With no time to process all the information, the group realized that Percy was now a known fugitive, as the media were reporting his involvement in the Arch incident and linking him to other recent events, such as the bus crash in New Jersey. With the situation becoming more dangerous, they decided to flee the city before being caught. They managed to reach the Amtrak train station and boarded a train that would take them to Denver, away from the emergency lights and reporters' cameras that still filled the St. Louis sky. Chapter 15. On June 14th, just 7 days before the solstice, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover arrived in Denver, hungry and exhausted after a long journey. Annabeth's priority was to contact Chiron to talk about the appearance of the mysterious figure in the river. Determined not to use phones, Annabeth led the group to an empty car wash where, with a mix of coins and a hose, they invoked a rainbow and performed an iris message to communicate with Luke at Half-Blood Hill. Through the rainbow, Luke informed Percy of the growing tension at camp due to the dispute between Zeus and Poseidon. The campers were aligning with different gods, reminiscent of the Trojan War. Luke shared his concern about the possibility that Hades was the thief of the Master Bolt, speculating that he might have used his Helm of Darkness to steal it, though he didn't directly implicate Annabeth. However, before Luke could say more, the connection was cut, leaving them with more questions than answers. Later, looking for a place to eat, the group found themselves at a restaurant where, without money, the situation became tense until a gigantic motorcycle stopped in front of the place. The motorcyclist, an imposing and terrifying man, turned out to be Ares, the god of war. Ares not only paid for their meal but also offered them a favor, to retrieve his lost shield from an abandoned water park, hinting that in return, he would provide help in their quest and even information about Percy's mother. Despite his aversion to Ares, Percy was forced to accept the task, knowing that rejecting a god could have terrible consequences. They arrived at the water park in question, a desolate and gloomy place where the Tunnel of Love attraction housed Ares' shield. Although the mission seemed simple, Annabeth soon discovered that it was all a trap designed by Hephaestus to catch Ares and Aphrodite in one of their love escapades. As soon as Percy grabbed the shield, he activated a mechanism that unleashed a wave of robotic spiders that attacked Annabeth, causing her uncontrollable panic. As the security cameras began broadcasting the scene to Olympus, Percy and Annabeth were forced to get into the attraction's boat, where Percy, using his control over water, managed to flood the pool, annihilating the spiders and launching them into a frantic ride through the Tunnel of Love. Finally, the boat crashed into the closed doors, but thanks to Grover's intervention, who caught them in the air with his flying shoes, they managed to land safely. Although exhausted, Percy, with Ares' shield in hand, was determined to confront the god of war for having manipulated them and put their lives in danger for a mere game. Chapter 16. As they left the restaurant, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover found Ares waiting for them in the parking lot. Percy, frustrated by the trap he had set for them, confronted the god of war, but Ares just smiled, pleased that they had survived. He then pointed them to a zoo transport truck, indicating that it would be their means of transportation to Los Angeles, with a stop in Las Vegas. Although Percy insulted him, Grover intervened, thanking him, reminding Percy that it was dangerous to anger a god. The truck, marked with the logo Kindness International, Humanoid Zoo Transport, turned out to be a vehicle containing animals in cages and in deplorable conditions. There was a zebra, an albino lion, and an antelope, all of them mistreated and in a dire state. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover decided to help the animals, giving them water and proper food, but they couldn't release them until the truck stopped. As the truck moved forward, the group tried to rest, although the situation was uncomfortable and distressing. During the night, Annabeth revealed her fear of spiders, a phobia stemming from the ancient rivalry between Athena and Arachne, and Grover confessed the guilt he felt for not being able to save Talia, Zeus's daughter, years ago. Percy and Annabeth tried to comfort him, reminding him that he had done everything he could and that they were grateful for his bravery. When the truck finally stopped in Las Vegas, the group took the opportunity to free the animals. Percy discovered that he could understand the zebra, which led him to suspect that it might be due to Poseidon's connection with horses. They broke the locks on the cages, allowing the animals to escape. Although they caused a small chaos in the city, they managed to free the animals without being caught. Seeking refuge from the heat, the group found themselves at the luxurious Lotus Hotel and Casino, a place that seemed to offer everything a kid could want: games, food, attractions, and all without apparent cost. However, they soon realized that something was wrong. Percy noticed that the other kids in the casino seemed trapped in time, some even from decades ago. Annabeth and Grover also fell under the place's spell, forgetting their quest and getting lost in the games. Percy, realizing the danger, managed to snap his friends out of the trance by reminding them of their quest and how important it was to keep going. As they left the casino, they realized they had lost 5 days inside, and now they had only 1 day left to reach Los Angeles and complete their quest before the summer solstice. Chapter 17. It all started with a bold idea from Annabeth. In Las Vegas, she flagged down a taxi and, without hesitation, asked the driver to take them to Los Angeles. The taxi driver, surprised by the request, agreed when Annabeth offered to pay with her Lotus Casino debit card. When she swiped it, the machine displayed an infinite value, leaving the driver astonished, who quickly seated them in the taxi and set off on a dizzying drive through the Mojave Desert. During the journey, Percy told his friends about his latest dream, but he realized that many details were slipping away, probably due to their stay at the Lotus Casino. He remembered a mysterious voice in the pit that didn't seem to be a god's, which unsettled Annabeth. As they got closer to California, Percy couldn't shake the feeling that confronting Hades wasn't the solution to their quest. However, Annabeth was convinced that the answer lay in the underworld. As night fell, they arrived at Santa Monica Beach. Percy, determined to discover more about his connection with the sea, walked toward the waves, ignoring Annabeth's warnings about the water pollution. Fully submerging himself, he discovered that he could breathe underwater and perceive his underwater surroundings with surprising clarity. That's when a Nereid, a sea spirit, appeared to him riding a hippocampus. She explained that while Poseidon couldn't help him directly, he wouldn't allow Percy to die before his time. The Nereid gave him 3 magical pearls and warned him to use them only in extreme need. She also reminded him to trust his heart and not be deceived by Hades. Percy emerged from the water and told Annabeth and Grover what had happened. Annabeth, skeptical about the gifts, reminded them that in Greek mythology, there were no gifts without a hidden cost. They decided to continue their journey to the underworld, and after a bus ride to West Hollywood, they began searching for the mysterious address of DOA Recording Studios, which supposedly housed the entrance to the underworld. As they walked, Percy saw his stepfather, Smelly Gabe, in a TV interview, where he talked about the tragedy of losing his wife and stepson, fueling the lies that made him out to be a victim. Night fell over Los Angeles, a city that felt strange and dangerous to them. While searching for the entrance to the underworld, they encountered a gang of troublemaking youths. Percy, without hesitation, drew his sword, but the boys, being mortals, weren't harmed. They took advantage of the confusion to flee and took refuge in an open store called Krusty's Waterbed Palace. Inside the store, they were greeted by a strange man named Krusty, a sinister-looking giant with a cold smile. Krusty invited them to try out his beds, and both Grover and Annabeth fell into his trap. The beds immobilized them with magical ropes that began to stretch them, trying to make them fit a specific bed size. Percy, realizing that they were in the hands of Krusties, The Stretcher, a giant from mythology who adjusted his victims to the size of his beds, tricked Krusty into lying down on one of his own beds. With a snap of his fingers, Percy activated the ropes that immobilized the giant, allowing him to free his friends. After defeating Krusty, Percy found a map behind the counter with the location of DOA Recording Studios, their next destination. Although exhausted from the encounter, they had no time to waste. The underworld was just a block away, and the summer solstice was rapidly approaching. Chapter 18. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover found themselves standing in front of DOA Recording Studios. The glass doors bore unsettling inscriptions: "No lawyers, no bums, no living." Despite it being midnight, the lobby was brightly lit and filled with people who seemed immobile, and when observed closely, appeared transparent. Behind a tall counter stood a security guard, tall and elegant, wearing sunglasses and a black rose in his lapel, who gave them a cold, cunning look. Reading his ID, Percy mistook him for Chiron, which irritated the guard, who corrected him, saying his name was Sharon. Percy and his friends tried to convince Sharon that they were dead souls, but the guard wasn't fooled, recognizing that Percy was a demigod. Even so, Percy managed to bribe him with gold drachmas to take them to the underworld. Sharon guided them to an elevator that, as it descended, transformed into a barge on the river Styx, a dark and polluted river. The atmosphere became somber, with stalactites hanging from the ceiling and a shore illuminated by a poisonous green light awaiting them. When they arrived, Sharon wished them luck, though with sarcasm, knowing that few good things awaited them in the underworld. In front of them, the entrance to the underworld resembled a cross between an airport security checkpoint and a freeway. 3 different entrances led to different areas of the underworld: the gates of Erebus, with metal detectors and security booths operated by ghosts. The spirits formed lines to be judged and assigned to their final destination: the Elysian Fields, the Asphodel Fields, or special punishment in Tartarus. As they approached, the roar of a gigantic animal echoed in the air. In the distance, they saw the guardian of the underworld, Cerberus, a gigantic 3-headed Rottweiler. Although mostly invisible, its eyes and teeth stood out, and it was clearly focused on Percy and his friends, detecting their living nature. Percy tried to distract the monster with a stick, but it didn't work. Grover warned them that Cerberus had given them 10 seconds before deciding to eat them. In a bold move, Annabeth pulled out a red rubber ball from her bag, catching Cerberus's attention. With authority, she ordered him to sit, and the giant obeyed, impressed by Annabeth's firmness. She managed to distract him by throwing the ball, allowing Percy and Grover to pass under the dog into the quick death line. Before following them, Annabeth promised Cerberus she would bring him another ball, and for the first time, the monster showed a look of sadness. Although they managed to cross the gates, alarms went off, alerting the Furies. They took refuge in the trunk of a rotten tree, while the ghostly security guards searched for them. Grover, still trembling, joked about how Percy's plans had gone wrong, but Percy felt that, in some way, they had done the right thing by showing compassion and care, even in the underworld. Annabeth, visibly affected, wiped away a tear as they listened to Cerberus's sad howl, missing his new friend. Chapter 19. As they ventured deeper into the underworld, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover reached the fields of Asphodel, a vast, gloomy place that felt like a perpetual concert that never started. The blackened grass was worn down by centuries of wandering souls, and a warm, sticky wind, like the breath of a swamp, permeated the air. As they moved forward, the ground crunched beneath their feet, covered with stalactites that had fallen from the ceiling and jutted out from the grass like blades. The 3 friends mingled with the crowd of souls, trying to blend in. Percy observed the blurry, confused faces of the dead, who seemed to want to communicate, but their voices only emitted strange, muffled sounds. As they advanced, they saw the Judgment Pavilion where the dead were sent to 3 destinations: the Fields of Punishment, Elysium, or the Asphodel Fields themselves. The Fields of Punishment glowed in the distance, a hellish landscape of lava rivers and minefields where souls were subjected to eternal tortures. In contrast, Elysium appeared as a place of peace and happiness, a valley of gardens and mansions where only a few privileged souls rested. Although this was the destination any hero would aspire to, Percy noticed how small it was compared to the other places, reflecting how few achieved a life of true virtue. They left the pavilion behind and ventured further into the somber fields of Asphodel, where the darkness deepened and the colors faded from their clothes. In the distance, they saw the imposing palace of Hades, made of black obsidian and patrolled by the Furies, who seemed to be waiting for their arrival. Grover, fearful, suggested turning back, but his magic shoes, as if they had a mind of their own, dragged him at great speed toward a dark tunnel. Percy and Annabeth ran after him, trying to catch up, but Grover was pulled toward an abyss that opened in the center of a cavern. Just as he was about to fall, one of his shoes slipped off, allowing him to cling to a rock and avoid the plunge. Percy and Annabeth managed to reach him and pull him to safety. As they recovered, they heard a deep, malevolent whisper emanating from the abyss, Tartarus. Terrified, they quickly moved away from the edge, feeling the pull of the pit that seemed to want to drag them into its depths. Finally, they arrived at Hades' palace. The fortress, with its black walls and bronze gates, was guarded by skeletal warriors from different eras. Upon entering the throne room, they found themselves face to face with Hades, the god of the dead, who received them with a mix of disdain and suspicion. Wearing a black silk robe and a golden crown, Hades radiated terrifying power. Despite his imposing size, it wasn't his physique that was most impressive, but the sense of danger and authority that emanated from him. Hades, believing that Percy had come to negotiate, accused the young hero of having stolen his helm of darkness and Zeus's master bolt. Percy, bewildered, tried to explain that he had neither of the objects, but Hades, convinced of his guilt, forced him to open his backpack. To everyone's surprise, inside was the master bolt, a metal cylinder humming with dangerous energy. Percy realized they had been tricked. The bolt had been placed in his backpack without his knowledge, and Hades, believing him to be the thief, demanded the return of his helm in exchange for Percy's mother's life, whom he had captured. Desperate, Percy thought of the pearls the Nereid had given him, but Hades, aware of their existence, warned him that only one person could be saved by each pearl. Percy had to make a difficult decision. Despite Grover and Annabeth's pleas to leave them behind, he decided to use the pearls to save his friends and face Hades alone later. When the pearls shattered, the three of them were surrounded by magical bubbles that lifted them into the air, away from Hades' fury and his minions. The god of the dead, enraged, unleashed his wrath upon the mortal world, causing an earthquake in Los Angeles as the bubbles ascended to the surface. Finally, the bubbles burst in the middle of Santa Monica Bay and Percy, Grover, and Annabeth emerged from the sea, safe but aware that the battle was far from over. Los Angeles burned in the distance, and Percy knew he had to get the Master Bolt to Olympus before it was too late. Moreover, he had a pending conversation with the god who had manipulated everything, and now it was time to face the truth. Chapter 20. After being rescued by a Coast Guard boat and dropped off at the Santa Monica Pier, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover stood drenched and exhausted, watching the city of Los Angeles burn after the devastating earthquake that Hades had unleashed. Although they felt relieved to be safe, the weight of what had happened in the underworld, especially with Percy's mother, hung heavily in their hearts. As they recovered on the beach, Annabeth and Grover tried to make sense of what had happened, but Percy, still in shock, began to reflect on the prophecy and what had really transpired. It was then that he realized it had all been a trap from the beginning, a meticulously designed plan to provoke a war between the big three, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Percy understood that Hades wasn't the real enemy but someone else who had manipulated events from the shadows. While Percy tried to unravel the mystery, Ares, the god of war, appeared, riding his motorcycle with an aluminum baseball bat slung over his shoulder and a look of satisfaction on his face. Ares, with his usual arrogance, confessed to being part of the plan, though not the mastermind but rather a pleased executor of the war that was about to erupt. He explained how he had manipulated the situation to ensure that the Master Bolt and Hades' helm ended up in the underworld, intending to spark a war he so eagerly desired. However, Percy challenged him, accusing him of not being the true mastermind behind the theft but rather a pawn of a more powerful force that had manipulated him. Irritated by the accusation, Ares decided to face Percy in a duel. With a snap of his fingers, he summoned a giant boar, which charged at Percy, But Percy, tired of running, decided to confront it head-on. Using his water-related abilities, Percy managed to defeat the boar, which enraged Ares, forcing him to accept Percy's personal challenge. The fight was fierce, and though Ares was an invincible god, Percy demonstrated surprising bravery and skill. With the help of Annabeth, who gave him her necklace with beads and her father's ring for good luck, and Grover, who offered him a crushed can as a charm, Percy faced Ares with all his might. Despite the god's overwhelming superiority, Percy managed to wound Ares in the heel, unleashing his wrath and surprising everyone present. At that moment, a dark, cold presence swept across the beach, stopping Ares in his tracks. The atmosphere changed drastically, filling with despair and fear, causing even the powerful god of war to hesitate, confused and weakened. Recognizing that he had lost, Ares cast a curse on Percy, warning him that every time he wielded his sword, he would feel his presence. After Ares's retreat, the Furies descended from the sky. The leader, who had been Mrs. Dodds, was surprised to see that Percy wasn't the thief they had been searching for. Still enraged, Percy threw Hades's helm to them and ordered them to return it and convey the truth to their master, thus halting the imminent war. With the Furies' departure, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover were left alone on the beach, shocked by what had just happened. Although exhausted and hurt, Percy knew they couldn't stop. With the Master Bolt still in his possession, they decided to return to New York as quickly as possible, despite the dangers of flying directly into Zeus's territory. Percy understood that it was the only way to prevent the war and restore peace among the gods. Chapter 21. It's curious how humans interpret reality based on what they can understand. Chiron had mentioned this once, but Percy didn't fully grasp its meaning until he experienced it firsthand. The news in Los Angeles reported that the explosion on Santa Monica Beach was caused by a kidnapper who, by shooting a shotgun at a police car, had ruptured a gas pipe damaged during the earthquake. That kidnapper, of course, was Ares, but the media presented him as a madman who had abducted Percy and 2 other teenagers in New York, leading them on a dangerous cross-country odyssey. Thus, Percy went from being a wanted criminal to a hero, a brave young man who had escaped his captor and, in the end, faced him on the beach. With that story firmly planted in everyone's minds, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover simply nodded and played the part of victims before the cameras, which wasn't difficult given their genuine fatigue and the tears that escaped as they recalled what they had lived through. Thanks to the sympathy they garnered from people, they secured tickets to fly back to New York. Although the idea of flying terrified Percy, there was no other option, so he boarded the plane with his heart in his throat, praying that Zeus wouldn't decide to strike him down mid-flight. They landed safely at LaGuardia, and using Annabeth's Yankees cap to divert the attention of reporters, they managed to escape the eager press awaiting them. At the taxi stand, Percy said goodbye to his friends, asking them to return to Camp Half-Blood and tell Chiron everything. Though it was hard to part from them, Percy knew he had to face the last part of his mission alone. Once in Manhattan, Percy headed to the Empire State Building. The guard, who initially paid him little attention, changed his demeanor upon seeing the contents of Percy's backpack. Nervously, he handed Percy a security card, which Percy inserted into the elevator. The button for the 600th floor lit up, and when the doors opened, Percy found himself on a stone walkway suspended in the void, with Manhattan far below. In front of him, a marble staircase spiraled up into the sky, where Mount Olympus stood, a majestic city full of golden palaces, marble columns, and hanging gardens. As Percy ascended, he witnessed life on Olympus. Nymphs laughing and tossing olives at him, vendors in the market offering ambrosia and divine artifacts, and the 9 muses tuning their instruments for a concert. No one seemed worried about the impending war among the gods. In fact, Olympus seemed to be in celebration. Finally, Percy reached the grand palace at the summit, where 2 thrones were occupied, Zeus's and Poseidon's. Zeus, imposing and majestic, wore a navy blue suit, and his platinum throne radiated power. Beside him, Poseidon looked more relaxed, dressed casually, and seated on a fisherman's chair as his throne. Both gods observed him intently, and Percy felt the tension in the air, indicating that they had just had an argument. However, when Percy knelt before his father, Poseidon, and greeted him, Zeus reminded him that he should address the master of the house first. Poseidon intervened, indicating that Percy had acted correctly by addressing his father first. Percy recounted his story, handing the master bolt to Zeus, who confirmed that Percy was telling the truth, though he found it hard to believe that Ares had acted so recklessly. Percy suggested that Ares hadn't acted alone but had been manipulated by a more powerful force, a malevolent presence he had felt both in his dreams and on the beach during their confrontation. Poseidon and Zeus briefly argued in ancient Greek, but Zeus decided not to dwell on the matter, ordering that the bolt be purified and thanking Percy for his service. Although he forgave Percy, Zeus made it clear that he didn't trust him and that his very existence was a concern for Olympus's future. Before leaving, Percy asked Poseidon about the presence in the pit, and his father confirmed that it was Kronos, the Titan father of the gods, whose dark power and hunger for revenge still lingered in Tartarus. Though Kronos was banished and dismembered, Poseidon explained that the Titan occasionally managed to influence the world, but suggesting his full return was another matter. Zeus had decided not to speak further on the topic, and Percy understood there was nothing more he could do for now. Poseidon informed Percy that his mother had been returned to life by Hades as part of the deal for the recovery of his helm. Percy felt deep joy but also a great weight in his heart when Poseidon told him he would have to make an important decision upon returning home. Percy bid farewell to his father and returned to the mortal world, where he was greeted with respect and admiration by the inhabitants of Olympus. Back in Manhattan, Percy headed to his mother's apartment, where they were finally reunited. Although the emotion and relief were immense, Percy realized that Gabe was still a problem. When he entered the apartment, he found it in shambles, with Gabe and his friends playing poker and mistreating his mother. Percy was filled with rage as he realized that Gabe had been abusing his mother for a long time. Percy had the opportunity to use divine power to get rid of Gabe forever, but when he suggested it to his mother, she stopped him. She told him he couldn't solve her problems for her, that she had to find her own path and live her life for herself. Percy understood that his mother was right, and though it was difficult, he decided not to use the power of the box he had received. Instead, he left the box in his room for his mother to decide what to do with it. Before leaving for Camp Half-Blood, Percy looked at his mother with newfound admiration, knowing that she had the strength to face Gabe on her own. With a wink of complicity, Percy left the apartment, confident that his mother would make the right decision. As he walked away, he knew that his mission wasn't over, but the greatest challenge was now in good hands. Chapter 22. When Percy, Annabeth, and Grover returned to Camp Half-Blood, they were welcomed as heroes. They were the first to return alive since Luke's quest, so everyone treated them as if they had won a reality show. A grand festival was organized in their honor. According to tradition, they were crowned with laurels and then led in a procession to the bonfire, where they were to burn the shrouds their cabins had made for them during their absence. Annabeth's shroud, made of gray silk with silver owls embroidered on it, was so beautiful that Percy joked it was a shame not to bury her in it. In contrast, Percy's shroud, made by the Ares cabin, was an old sheet painted with smiley faces with crossed eyes and the word "loser" in big letters, which they thoroughly enjoyed burning. During the celebration, Percy reunited with his old Hermes cabin mates, Annabeth's friends from the Athena cabin, and the satyrs who admired Grover's newly issued searcher's license. Grover's performance on the quest was deemed brave to the point of indigestion by the Council of Cloven Elders. The only ones who didn't seem to enjoy the party were Clarice and the Ares cabin, who were furious with Percy for embarrassing their father, Ares. But Percy didn't care. Not even Dionysus's sarcastic welcome speech could sour his mood. Though Percy had returned to Cabin 3, he no longer felt alone. He had friends to train with during the day, and at night, he listened to the sea, feeling his father Poseidon's presence. Although he wasn't sure how his father felt about him, he knew that he was watching over him and, so far, was proud of his accomplishments. A week after his return to camp, Percy received a letter from his mother. She wrote that Gabe had mysteriously disappeared and that, with the money from selling her first sculpture, titled The Poker Player, she had paid the deposit for a new apartment and enrolled at NYU. She also informed him that she had found a good private school for Percy in the city, in case he wanted to enroll in 7th grade and live at home. On the 4th of July, The camp celebrated with fireworks organized by Cabin 9. Hephaestus's children put on an impressive show, with giant Spartan warriors coming to life in the sky, fighting and exploding into 1,000 colors. During the preparation for the show, Grover appeared to say goodbye. He had matured in the past few weeks, now looking older with a thicker beard and horns that had grown 3 inches. Percy and Annabeth wished him luck on his search for Pan, and though it was hard to say goodbye, Percy tried to stay positive. July passed quickly, with Percy training at camp, developing new strategies for capture the flag, and strengthening his skills. However, the oracle's prophecies still haunted his mind. Although he had fulfilled most of the prophecies, one in particular troubled him: "You shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend." Though Percy tried to convince himself that Ares was the traitor, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The last night of the summer session came too quickly. During the farewell dinner, Percy received his first bead necklace, with a black bead bearing a sea-green trident in the center, commemorating his quest to prevent a war. The entire camp cheered for him, and Percy felt a mix of joy and sadness, knowing that soon most of them would be leaving. The next morning, Percy found a letter on his nightstand, written by Dionysus, asking him to notify whether he would stay at camp year-round or leave. Percy's decision wasn't easy, but he decided to head to the stadium to train with his sword a bit to clear his mind. There, he found Luke, who was also training. Luke, who had been somewhat distant since Percy's return, invited him on one last expedition into the woods. Though Percy hesitated, he eventually agreed. In the woods, Luke and Percy sat by a stream, drinking some cokes that Luke had brought. As they chatted, Percy asked Luke if he missed going on quests, and Luke's expression turned grim. He confessed to Percy that he was tired of being a pawn of the gods and planned to leave. Suddenly, Luke snapped his fingers, and a scorpion emerged from the ground, starting to crawl toward Percy. It was then that Percy understood the betrayal. "You shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend." Luke, under Kronos' influence, had planned everything to lead Olympus to its destruction. Ares had been manipulated, and Luke, filled with hatred for the gods, was determined to bring down Olympus. Before leaving, Luke revealed his hatred for the gods and his desire to destroy Western civilization, which he saw as a disease. Percy tried to reason with him, but Luke was convinced he was on the right path. Finally, Luke disappeared, leaving Percy at the mercy of the scorpion. Though Percy managed to kill the scorpion, he was stung and barely made it back to camp before collapsing. When Percy woke up in the big house infirmary, Annabeth and Chiron were by his side. Percy told them what had happened with Luke, and Chiron decided to go to Olympus to inform the gods. Percy wanted to go after Luke, but Chiron convinced him that he needed to recover and train more before facing his enemy. Chiron also reminded him of the importance of deciding whether to stay at camp year-round or return to the mortal world for 7th grade. Before Chiron left, Percy tried to get more information about the oracle's prophecy, but Chiron remained reserved, telling him that knowing too much about the future was never good. Still weakened, Percy decided to go out to the porch with Annabeth's help. There, Annabeth revealed that she had decided to return to her father after writing him a letter asking for forgiveness. Although they said goodbye with a plan to search for Luke next summer, Percy couldn't help but feel alone as he watched her leave. Finally, Percy made a decision. He knew he would face many dangers if he left camp, but he decided to return to the mortal world to be with his mother. With the promise of returning next summer, Percy asked Argos to accompany him to Cabin 3 to pack his things and head home. Thank you for joining us on this literary journey through The Lightning Thief. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating book summaries. Who is your favorite Greek god? What power would you like to have if you were a demigod? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read your answers.